I remember in something like second grade or something when you're asked to write about what do you want to do as a career. I wanted to be a music teacher. And I've always liked music. I took tap dancing lessons. I made paper mache weird things in my basement and jewelry, and I sewed doll clothes and I painted and all those things. So I always wanted to do everything. And I like taking photographs. It didn't occur to me till much later that all of those things converge in filmmaking and especially in animation. I've only had one animation class, and it was this incredible sort of breakthrough for me to go like, wow, this is storytelling, it's choreographing artwork, it's all different kinds of artwork, it's filmmaking using cameras. So that was the big epiphany, to take one animation class and go like, I think that's where I can put all these interests together. So I got into this. A lot of people go into animation or filmmaking sort of like really loving that. I love Disney films, but I didn't say, well, that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to do all this art stuff. I just recently realized, because it's the 50th anniversary of the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, and I went to see the gloriously restored 4K version because I'd been really interested in the Beatles as a kid, as a little girl in 4th grade, but I only realized a month ago when that film came out how much that influenced me to be a filmmaker and an animator. It's very mixed media, it's based on real people, so there's this kind of sort of documentary feel to it. I mean seriously, I just realized this. I think that's driven me as a creative person much more than I ever realized. Luckily, growing up in a small town Ohio, our schools placed a great emphasis on the arts. So we were always involved in little plays and things, and also very involved in music. I mean, I think there's a reason that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is in Cleveland. I grew up outside of Cleveland. So this presence of theater and music, as well as the Cleveland Art Museum, I connected with that very much as a kid. That involvement all through school in plays and good art teachers and good music teachers helped me realize not only the amazing satisfaction of being an individual artist, which I still cherish. I still do my own sculptural work. I do mixed media work with my husband, Jimmy. That's very important to me, but I love the collaborative work too. So that idea of you can get together with a bunch of people and make cool stuff was appealing to me early on. So I think that came through choirs and theater and that kind of thing. I did own my own company in New York City for 14 years, in focusing mostly on stop motion. It was short form stuff. So I've hired a lot of people, and the people I wanted to hire were interesting artists. People that they understood stop motion animation production, they could build models, they understood storyboarding, they understood lighting, you know, all the production parts. But beyond that, they were artists, and they were bringing some of their own vision to the production. And as we solve problems, they brought that artistic sensibility and way of problem solving to it. So I think that's helped me tremendously, that I had amazing art teachers and they helped me think that way. And so I'd like to think that's maybe, you know, partly what's made me a good person in a production, is that I've always had that, I've always cherished that, and I bring that to whatever I do. And that's something I've been continue to try to bring to everything I do, my teaching and filmmaking and my own art, and just kind of living, you know, living as an artist. The Green Book film in a lot of ways selected me. I feel so fortunate that I met my co-producer, Calvin Alexander Ramsey, and that we got to be friends. He is African American. I'm not. I'll talk about that in a minute. I like to say that puppets changed my life. The Center for Puppetry Arts in Atlanta, one of the most outstanding museums of that kind in the world, brings amazing work to the stage in various forms of puppetry. I take my students to see productions there because I think it's very important that as a professor of animation, I also expose my students to a lot of the arts, and puppetry in particular. Puppetry is the grandmother of animation, and if you don't look at what people have done for thousands of years, creating characters and telling visual stories, as an animator, you're missing a whole bunch of what we come from. So I regularly take students to see shows there. There was a show called Ruth in the Green Book. I had no idea what it was. It was a children's book based on the Negro motorist Green Book, and the children's story was written by Calvin Alexander Ramsey. He had won some awards for this book, and the Center for Puppetry Arts had gotten some, I believe it was a National Endowment for the Humanities grant, to collaborate with Calvin to create a musical puppet show based on his book. For this show, as in many of their shows, they had a very innovative approach in that there were live actors on the stage acting as the characters in the children's book, but they also had puppets of themselves, which they were manipulating at the same times. They also had an entire 1959 Buick that they brought on stage as part of it. So really innovative staging, very engaging, wonderful music. But the subject matter is very difficult. It's about traveling during Jim Crow. The difficulties, the dangers, the degradation, the lack of respect that African Americans were given during Jim Crow, even though it was technically illegal. So here's this very, very, very difficult subject matter, and Calvin wrote a lovely children's book about it, about a little girl sort of coming to grips with that and learning to be kind and how important that is. And then it gets translated to a puppet show, so it's a very unlikely situation. But I love the Center for Puppetry Arts, read up a little bit, saw Calvin's picture, went to the show. Calvin was at the show. I went up and introduced myself. He said, "Oh, tell me how your students like this afterwards. I'd really like to know." I was like, "Absolutely." So the show is one of the best pieces of theater I have ever seen in my life. It was uplifting. It didn't avoid anything difficult, but it just blew me away. And I was so eager to talk to Calvin. Ended up inviting him to come speak to some of my classes. Calvin was so wonderful as a speaker with my students, and his sense of humanity and lack of bitterness just really resonated with me. So we just got to be friends, and he said, "Hey, I've met a lot of people who actually use the Green Book to travel. Would you want to make a film with me?" And I was like, "Sure, can we put some animation in it?" He was like, "Sure." We thought we were going to make a short film with some of my video students, and then we got so much material, we had to rethink that and expand it. The history of Jim Crow and the Green Book is American history. It is not Black history. It is American history, because without white people, there wouldn't be Jim Crow. So if we relegate anything about civil rights to, oh, that's Black issues, and we're missing the point that this is American experience. And Calvin said that to me right off the bat, and I was like, that speaks to me. Even being a person of white privilege, which I am, growing up, I heard that my family relatives, my family ancestors, owned a tavern that was a stop on the Underground Railway. So Ohio is one of the main avenues of Underground Railway traffic. I heard about this and I was like, oh, cool, these people were playing hide and seek. They were running away and they were hiding, and that sounds really adventurous. And then along about junior high, I went, wait a minute, why didn't they just stay upstairs with everyone else? Why didn't they eat in the dining room? Why weren't these African Americans who were so desperate to get away from difficult things, why weren't they welcomed like everybody else that was traveling? And so I've been asking myself that question ever since. So it's part of my family heritage. The other parts of it, and I think a lot of people can relate to this today, is that I have mixed race people in my family. I have 2 grandchildren who are mixed race. I have 3 nieces and 1 nephew who are mixed race. A huge percentage of my students have been people of color from all over the world. So even though I come from white privilege, I never have existed in that as a box. So it all circles back around to the Jim Crow stories and civil rights stories are American history stories. The story of the Green Book almost got lost if it wasn't for a handful of people like Calvin Ramsey. Candace Taylor is a scholar who we were fortunate to interview. She is writing a very extensive book right now called The Overground Railroad. We got to interview her, and she and I have become friends, and she's friends with Calvin, and we share information and so forth. There's another woman named Gretchen Soren. She's making a film about traveling while black with Rick Burns, brother of Ken Burns, and that's in process now. Other than Calvin, Candace, and Gretchen, though, there haven't been very many people looking into the Green Book specifically. The Green Book is a publication. It doesn't exist anymore. It's a travel guide for African Americans where they could find places that welcome them along the road. So hotels, nightclubs, restaurants would be the most obvious things to think of, but also gas stations, beauty parlors, stores. It's called the Green Book because it was published by Victor Green. So there's a family name. You know, obviously a great marketing choice. Let's make the covers green because that's how people will remember it. It was a little pamphlet. It started out very humbly as just a few pages in 1936. It gradually got bigger and turned into a booklet. The last publication, I believe, was 1966-67. And by then, it had evolved from being the Negro Motorist Guide, focusing on driving, to the Negro Traveler's Guide. Over time, it was called that. There were special editions devoted to rail travel, air travel, expanded to international destinations. So by the last publication, the last edition rather, there were listings from all over the world. When people think of Jim Crow, they mostly think of difficulties in the South, which there absolutely were. There was probably quantity-wise the most discrimination, the most sundown towns and so forth, but these things extended all over the country, out west, up north, so this was not limited to the South.
We drove constantly, we didn't stop.
Segregation, separation wasn't just in the South.
Travel was very difficult during those days.
They had the colored restrooms and they were filthy. But what do you do if that's all you've got?
You drove swiftly. You made no fuss or any type of commotion to try to attract any attention whatsoever. It was dangerous.
Needed to show that there were places to stay on a trip. There were places to enjoy music. A great, thing I'll never be able to get my head around is there's these brilliant, genius musicians that all Americans enjoyed, so they could play these big fancy white clubs, but they couldn't stay there in the hotels. That's just, I just can't. In what universe did people think that was okay? I just don't get that. I can't even picture anything about my growing up without incredible genius black musicians. That's just, I can't take that out. And I revere those people. I can't imagine treating them badly and why anybody would think. So people like Jimi Hendrix, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, on and on and on and on and on, These people have helped define American culture that I am part of, that we are all a part of. So a lot of the listings in the Green Book are indeed music venues and places to have a good time and experience that. Many of them welcomed white patrons as well. Another part of my growing up, and I know this really influenced me, is that my parents loved jazz. I grew up listening to Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald. My parents were big fans of the Preservation Hall Jazz Band. The depth of history about this, the Green Book, is being covered brilliantly by Candace Taylor in her book. Our film, The Green Book Chronicles, was always meant to be finding and interviewing people who used the Green Book to travel. What was that like? Or wish they had used it to travel. So talking to people now and just giving them a space to tell us what that was like. What do you think about this? It's been really interesting. Calvin and I have interviewed over 30 people. We've covered 6 locations. Atlanta is where we started. We've interviewed people in Washington, D.C., New York, Myrtle Beach, Birmingham, Alabama, Newark, New Jersey. Without exception, people always had more stories that they wanted to tell us. Well, we get them in front of the camera, and it wouldn't be just 2 or 3 stories, it would be 4 stories and 5 stories. And we're sitting back there by the camera going, just keep it rolling. We'll just take all the time we need. It seems to be that people have been carrying these stories and not talking about them. And now, for whatever reasons, maybe just simply because somebody asked, they want to share them. So it's a real honor to be given those gifts of stories. So those are the people we knew we were going to interview. In almost every shoot where Calvin and I have gone, somebody else just pops up out of nowhere that has a story. We were interviewing some people in the Schoenberg Center for Research in Black Culture in New York City who had just digitized, I believe it's around 22 editions of the Green Book. The Schoenberg now has the largest collection of Green Books. Before there had been 2 or 3 here and there. Emory has a few, Clark Atlanta has a few. They're scattered around, but the Schoenberg put together that many, and they've digitized them. You can go to New York Public Library Green Book and download every single page, every single cover of every single book, and it's amazing. It's a great gift. My husband, Jimmy, is an assistant producer and helping me with all kinds of things, research and production photography, but also making sure our car has parking meter money. So during the shoot, we realized our parking meter money had run out, and Jimmy and I were like, we're just going to duck out for a few minutes. We're going to go put some money in our parking meter. So we go out to the main lobby of the Schoenberg. There's this little old white couple sitting in the corner, and whatever, lots of different people go to the Schoenberg. But we said to the people at the desk, we're with the Green Book shoot. We're just going to put money in the meter. We'll be right back. And the man in the corner said, you're with the Green Book shoot? We said, yes, we are. Can we help you? He said, well, I just read about you in the New York Times yesterday because the Times had done a little story about us and said that you were going to be here, and I wanted to come and meet you. And I was like, oh, great. What's your interest in the Green Book? And the man that we met, Howard Gleaner, son of the printer, remembers meeting Victor Green. And I said, would you like to come downstairs and be interviewed? As soon as we put our money in the meter, let's go do that. So this was out of nowhere. And we had just finished interviewing Ramona Green, who was a niece by marriage of Victor Green, and her grandson. So we bring the son of the printer down to meet some family of Victor Green, and it's just like miraculous, absolutely miraculous.
Mr. Green was distinguished and even as a child, a very lovely man. And I will say it was unusual to have a black client working with a white printer.
Howard's and his wife Lila have been amazing friends to us and have come to lots of events. We had another one in New York. We were shooting some exteriors in Harlem before an interview, and there was a very nice woman just sitting quietly on a park bench near where we were shooting. And eventually she asked Jimmy, my husband, "Oh, what are you all doing?" And he gave her a business card and said, "Oh, we're making this documentary about the Green Book." And you can guess, she said, "Oh, my family used that to travel." And Jimmy's like, "Really? Hold on." So we moved our camera over. "Would you like to be interviewed?" "Oh, yes." And she told stories about using the book to travel. And so at first we were astonished by this, but now Calvin calls it Green Book magic. We just know wherever we go, something like this is going to happen, and it continues to do that. So there's something about these stories want to be told, and it's just thrilling and rewarding to be part of that. Just say, "Sure, say whatever you'd like to say, we're here." Calvin and I were going to work with film and video students and animation students and illustration students because I wanted a lot of rich visuals in this. Students were in my classes from all over the world, but there was one from Syria, and I just thought, what a great starting point. Here's this civil rights story from the United States. Let's use this as a starting point to also hear more about civil rights in Syria and what have you experienced. So I was thinking of it originally more as a teaching point, you know, to look for authentic material as an artist and look at the power that animation and film can have to share stories. One of the key animations in this film was actually made by that student, Amar Nasri, and he collaborated with Zhou Quan, a Chinese student. So a Chinese student and a Syrian student made animation for the Green Book film. And I just love that because when we started this film, it was 2012, and we had a black president, and we all thought, we're doing pretty good. We're post-racial, right? Well, as things developed and 2016 happened and all kinds of things happened, this film is very relevant now. I mean, it's kind of astonishing. We're having very difficult conversations about who is welcome, where, and when, and how do we decide that? You know, all of us in some form or another in America have grown up with love thy neighbor as thyself, okay? What does that mean? How do you practice that? So I think there's a lot of really big questions that we're facing today, and it can be overwhelming. So we all wonder, I think a lot of us wonder anyway, I'm just one person, what can I do? And so the model of Victor Green, in 1936, he was a postman. He was a letter carrier. He worked in Hackensack. He lived in Harlem. He's seeing all of this discrimination, this cruelty and around him. What can I do as one person? We know very little about Victor Green. We know more or less when he was born. He passed away in 1960. His wife carried on the Green Book publication with a group of women actually after that till about 66 or 67. We know a few things. So I can only just imagine this. I'm not quoting anything, but here's this person who works in the post office, he sees these horrible things. What can I do to help? Well, I know my letter carrier friends, they know places where African Americans would be able to stay. I'm just gonna make a list. So the first Green Book was just a couple pages of a list. And then he kept using that network to get more addresses of Black-owned businesses and some white-owned businesses that would welcome Americans. So that concept of networking that we're very familiar with today, and the internet, imagine doing that without computers and without the internet. How do you connect to other people without that technology? Well, gosh, if he could do it as one person who probably, from everything we know, which isn't much, but we don't think he had maybe even a high school degree, if he could figure out to make that kind of a difference with the limited resources he has and maximize those resources, well, we should be able to figure it out with all we have. So I'm hoping as a role model of welcoming and celebrating diversity that You know, here's an unsung hero among many unsung heroes. There are so many stories to be told, but here's one. It's been really important to me as an artist to think about social responsibility and social content and grounding things in history and recognizing whose shoulders we stand on and recognizing it's pretty tough to be a human being. But there's a lot to celebrate too. And to totally take that out of what we create is just creating like junk food to me. And I like junk food, all right? I like that once in a while, but I make it a huge point in my teaching to not beat people over the head with it, but just let's talk about this. Who are you representing? Whose story is this you're telling? I have to say this, and I can only speak for myself, but one of my roles at SCAD is to help seniors and thesis students develop their senior film. Often it's from the very beginning through the whole thing. So in coming up with an idea for a senior film, it's very important for me that students make conscious choices. This is your piece. It can be funny, it can be scary, it can be confusing, it can be anything you want, but this is you. What do you want to say? Every time I teach concept development, I look out and I see a sea of beautiful, diverse faces in my classroom. But unless I say it's okay to make a story about you as a Black person or a brown person or an Asian person, you don't have to make animation about white people. There's a lot of that. It's fine. What's your story? If I don't say that and help and give people permission to do that, they default to making stories usually about white boys. And it's heartbreaking to me. I can't not do anything about that. I can't. Some students haven't thought that much about it, and it's uncomfortable. And so that opens up a whole bunch of things that aren't easy to talk about. So I think some students are scared of that. And I don't believe, I'm not trying to force students or expect anyone, you must always make an autobiography. I mean, there's ways to work with metaphors and all kinds of things, but if you default to what's already out there in the media, you're just perpetuating it. And I just want students to take responsibility for what they're putting out there. Make conscious decisions, have reasons, not just, oh, it's the easiest thing I could think of. Trust yourself, I think, is the best advice I can give people. Learn, be willing to learn, be willing to grow, expose yourself to everything that you can, whether people like you, people not like you. You know, if Victor Green didn't trust himself, he wouldn't have done what he did. And so many other groundbreaking people, if they didn't just follow that thing inside that said, you're supposed to do this. At the end of the day with this Green Book film, I'm an old white woman who's making a Black film, you know, in a lot of people's minds, and they cannot figure it out. And like, that's okay. And I think there's been some resistance to being involved. And you know what? That's okay. But I know I have to do this. I've given you a lot of reasons why. At the end of the day, I'm not really exactly sure, but I am sure, I'm not exactly sure why, but I am sure that I have to do this. And I'm going to. And I got to raise completion funds. I was like, woo, that's crazy stuff, but I'm going to make it happen. So just find that thing that you know you have to do. You'll know it. Listen for it.